Hey reader, this is Centaur here, and today we are going to answer a question that I think a lot of us have been asking since third edition came around the corner and we saw the American special rules, and that is, are BARs good in bolt action third edition? Now, I don't think this was particularly controversial in second edition. I think most people would say BAR was great in second edition. Most people would load up on them as much as possible. U.S. Marines were very common because they could take more than U.S. Army in every squad. And I think arguably the BAR was one of the strongest small arms generally in second edition, right? Some machine guns were obviously better if you needed to get up close and personal, if you wanted to go into assault. A lot of people really love pistols because they were a super cheap way to get assault. But I think if I had to round out the top three would be some mix of pistols, submachine guns, and BARs. And in third edition, I've seen them come under a lot of scrutiny. A lot of people saying, leave them all at home, break all of your models and put rifles on them instead. And so I sat down because I had some time free waiting for a work event to just pull up Excel and actually run the math. Because I am that content creator for bolt action. That's my niche. That's my zone. That's what I do. And that's hopefully why you all are here. Y'all enjoy a good PowerPoint showing some big math deep dives. And today we are doing the deepest dive we've ever done. So, fair warning, if you don't like math deep dives, just skip past all of the slides that look like they got big spreadsheets on them and go to the end because we are going to summarize, okay? And the summary will be really good. But the TLDR, in case you're looking at it, is actually the BAR is still fine. Math still holds up for taking BAR. So if you have them in your collection and you were worried you're going to have to break them apart and re-glue and repaint and stuff like that, maybe hold off for a little bit and see the math, okay? Because the math actually says BAR is still worth taking, asterisk. It all depends. There's a strategy and a tactics element that's now present for the BAR that we didn't have before. And honestly, in my opinion, that's healthy for the game. So toward that end, let's jump into it because kids, you better strap in. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming real fast. So let's take a look at what we're going to look at. Similar to how we've been looking at it, we're going to be looking at range and rate of fire. We're going to look at pin generation capability that's present for the BAR. And then we're going to take a look at opportunity cost. And this is going to be like 2/3 of the video. Okay, we're going to be looking at a lot of different situations because there are a lot of situations we need to evaluate. So first of all, you have non-American nations that can take the BAR, right? Poland can take the BAR, Belgium can take the BAR, the British can take the BAR on their home guard, which is interesting because it's inexperienced only. But they can become green, so you can avoid that -1 to hit as long as you roll high enough on the green check. But then in addition to that, they get rapid fire potentially. So there's a lot of stuff we got to look at there for how that one works. But it's not just strictly an American thing. The thing is that all of those nations are limited to 1 BAR per squad. And that's a whole different thing when it comes to a 6-point drop instead of a 6, 12, or 18-point drop. So then we're going to take a look at American squads that can take 1 BAR, which includes inexperienced sections, regular sections, some veteran sections. You then have U.S. squads that can take 2, which is inexperienced sections, regular sections, and a couple of the veteran sections. And then you have 3 BAR squads, which is mostly regulars and veterans because it's Marines only. Right? So you have a lot of different things here, a lot of different kinds of math and things you're comparing. And of course, because we couldn't have the math be any easier, some of these options, like British Home Guard, American Airborne, and U.S. Rangers, they can take 1 BAR. They can also take a light machine gun. In the case of Home Guard, you can take 2. So we're also going to take a look at, if you were looking at taking those units, do you instead want to take light machine guns instead? The math is coming heavy. We're going to jump straight into it really quickly. But then after that, we'll look at the ability of the BAR to do objective holding. We'll look at objective taking, like we have been looking at for infantry sections. And then we're going to look at the few changes that we might consider making and whether or not I would even recommend those in the first place. So to start off with, range, rate of fire, pin generation, all pretty straightforward stuff. Here we're looking at 30 freedom units with 2 attacks. It's America week, so we're measuring in freedom units today. It hasn't changed between second and third edition. The cost has changed between them, and so we'll look into that as we look at the potential optimization and min-maxing on points investment. But in this case, the profile has remained the same: 30 inches, 2 attacks, no special rules. In second edition, on average, you were hitting on about 5s or 6s. It depended on Obviously, with Americans, you could ignore the moving and shooting penalty, but then there was long range penalties and then recover penalties, which was an additional -1 to -2. A lot of people weren't dumb enough to leave themselves straight in front of an American squad with BARs, so because of that, they would probably have cover. It's about fives or sixes, which actually means between even just like 4 dudes and 1 BAR, 5 dudes and 1 BAR, 4 dudes, 2 BARs, pretty common build outs. You were getting about a pin every attack, which was really nice. Okay, in third edition, you're hitting on about 4s or 5s, depending on whether or not you choose to move, whether or not you have pins on you. But you're ignoring all those cover penalties and the range penalties effectively pre-baked in by moving your starting line from 4+ to 4+ instead of 3+. You're hitting on roughly 4s or 5s, which is still about 1 pin per attack, which is really nice. So in general, still contributes to being an effective pin generating machine. Okay, it's a negligible difference in terms of pin generation. Technically, it's slightly higher in third edition, but again, it's pretty negligible. It all depends on a lot of different things, right? And especially like how heavy are people going to work you down, right? Because as soon as you start counting, okay, I got a lot of pins on me, then you have the problem of, okay, well, now I'm definitely not going to move, so now I got to shoot from where I am if I want to shoot, and then there's the like there's just a lot of questions. You're also generally more likely to remove models in third edition than you were in second edition. So, you might not have the same number of shots, and we'll look at that as we look at the optimal size for units a little bit later. Okay. But just suffice it to say, from a pin generation perspective, range, rate of fire, all of this is goods. Okay. All of it is good. You can't go wrong. Good odds for any rifle section that takes these that they're going to be able to do something useful on the turn. Okay. In second edition, I think it was fair to say, since they benefited from fire and maneuver, it was totally worth it to take these. I think for non-Americans, it was also totally worth it to take these because for about half the cost of a regular dude, you were getting the same shot as that regular dude. You were getting extended reach on that dude and another dude. And the only thing you were trading off is you weren't losing, you didn't have a body that you could take as a casualty. That was really the only thing that you had. In third edition, the math changes a little bit because now it's 6 points per man, which is more than half the cost of most dudes. And it's almost the same cost as an inexperienced dude. And you're still getting a lot of these benefits, but it doesn't benefit from fire maneuver. So toward that end, let's take a look at what we've got. When we look at opportunity cost for regular troops with BARs, on the left-hand side there, that first set of 4 columns is going to be rifles only in the squad and how many rifles you have and how many you have left, which is important, okay? Because as you start losing models, the effectiveness and efficiency of a squad is going to go down, right? Because if you're gaining 1 extra shot for every 3 rifles that you have, the moment that you have a set of 1 to 2 rifles, you're less effective than if you had 3 generating that 4th shot, right? So I tracked it all the way down, all the way down. You obviously can't buy a squad with just 1 rifle in it. Okay, but suffice it to say, you've got your rifles. And then in the next set of 4, you've got what happens if you take 1 BAR. This would be true of Poles, Belgians, as well as American infantry sections of various kinds that take 1 BAR at regular, right? Not at veterans. This wouldn't include U.S. Rangers. It wouldn't include veteran Airborne. It wouldn't include veteran U.S. Marines, etc. Okay, and then we show the math for what happens if you're taking 2 BARs, right? And then we show the math if you're taking 3 BARs. So obviously, the bolded is for the number of shots you get, not the number of people, but the number of shots that you get. It is the best cost for shots. So points per shot, or PPS, as we'll be referring to it later on throughout this talk. And you'll notice there that, everybody starts on the same playing field when they have just 1 rifle. That would be just your NCO remaining, okay? If that's the case, everybody's paying 10 points per shot because they're only getting 1 shot and they're only paying 10 points for it, okay? As you start going up, you'll notice that the rifles only section has a lot of things in bold. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of the remaining 15 options are all, or actually, what is that? 13 options, something like that? Yeah, 8 of the remaining 12. Yeah, 8 out of 12 shots. So yeah, 9 out of 12. Let me go back and cut that out because that was gross. And so once we move beyond the 1 rifle, you'll notice that the rifle section on the far left-hand side, a lot of those are in bold. Bold reflects for cost per shot, or PPS, as we'll be referring to it throughout the rest of this, points per shot, right? For that value, out of the 12 total potential groupings that you could have, 9 of them are bolded, indicating that from a cost perspective, you are getting the most shots for the least number of points by taking just pure rifles. And that makes sense because you're getting extra shots for free instead of having to pay for them, right? What's interesting is the ones where you don't get it. So, for example, taking 5 rifles on their own, getting the extra shot, so that brings you up to 6, right? Because you have one set of 3, which generates an extra one, and you have 2, but you haven't gotten quite to that extra third one, is less effective than 3 rifles with 1 BAR. Because then you get the 3 rifles, you add an extra shot for having the 3 rifles, and then there's 2 more from the BAR, which gets you 6. So taking 1 BAR is actually more efficient by actually a decent amount, about half a point per shot that you're paying. So about 3 points over and against what you're getting from just taking straight rifles. Similarly, and you'll notice this, it's the exact same math of it's the step right before you get that third rifle to close out a set. So 8 rifles, 11 rifles, they suddenly start looking an awful lot better when you're looking at 1 BAR. Now, the 2 and 3 BARs don't really ever get more efficient, although they come really close sometimes to getting into the efficiency. The only one where you see a win from multiple BARs is when you start taking 9 rifles with 3 BARs, because it's the only one in this set that can get to 18. Similarly, by the way, and I actually realized looking back on it now that I didn't bold this on the chart, the 2 BARs is the best at 10 rifles with 2 BARs because it's the only one, with how the math works out, that actually gets to 17 shots. Okay, so in that sense, you are the most effective and most cost efficient at getting 17, in part because there is no other contestant, okay, that's going up against you. And so the 1 BAR actually comes out quite effective in quite a few of these, actually. I mean, it's mostly, again, wherever you're getting a number of rifles generating extra shots, and then also a bit of extra benefit from the BARs, right? Is kind of where it works out. But in general, and this is why I included the average over there at the top, you'll notice while technically rifles are more efficient in terms of the number of points you're paying per shot, the actual spread is between 8.31 points per shot and 8.25 points per shot. So you would save, to give you an idea of what that means in terms of actual math, between buying 10 shots worth of stuff, you would only be saving about a point, more or less, between all of these. It's only going to be a discrepancy of about 1 point. Okay, it's not going to be that much. If you were buying a discrepancy of, say, 100 shots, yeah, you'd be saving about 10 points in buying those 100 shots. But in general, it's not going to be that much. And that kind of makes sense, because when you think about it, you're paying for, less than half of a dude for each one, and you're getting the benefits of, a little less than a third of a dude, right? In terms of how BARs work in math and how free shots work in terms of math. So the result is they're actually pretty close in terms of statistical anomalies. It does mean, however, that there are some takeaways on which ones actually work better. Okay, the actual difference in PPS is pretty marginal. Rifles are generally better. Okay, so if you're of the crowd that says that rifles should be the things that you're taking because they are more efficient, from a technical standpoint, if we were looking at every point counts, you're absolutely right. That is true. As long as it's not a specific loadout. 8 infantry with rifles are not more efficient than, 4 dudes, 3 dudes with a BAR, right? Or something like that. There's, what is that, like 7 dudes with a BAR or something like that? So like there are some maths where it does end up working out better. Getting, 10 shots one way versus 10 shots another way does actually change the math. In general, 1 BAR is better on cost than 2 to 3. So for all those nations who are limited to 1, like the Belgians with the Chasseurs Ardennais and their other infantry sections that you see over there on the right, good news, guys. You are better off than others on the math. You're not missing out by not being able to take more than 1 BAR. So yay! There's that. You also, the real benefit from taking BARs, though, and you do see this in the math, and I'll go ahead and flip back just so you can see it, is that you maintain a higher number of shots for the number of bodies that you have remaining in the squad, right? Because each of these rows represents the same number of men, physical bodies that remain, that have each of the, that are holding weapons of some way, shape, or form. And you'll notice that you maintain 5, 6, 7 shots a lot longer than you would maintain them otherwise. And this is important because if you do end up having to hit on 5s or 6s, having closer to 6 shots is important because it guarantees that you're going to have that 1 pin per turn, return on investment, right? So toward that end, being able to maintain 6 to 8 shots for a longer period of time, even if it's only by 1 body, right, or something like that, is important. And in the case of somebody taking 3 BARs, like, if they take a squad of 7 or 8 men, you'd have to chop through half of the squad, and you still haven't chopped through half the firepower. Whereas if you chop an 8-man squad of rifles down to 4 men, deep, you have dropped them from 10 shots to 5. So you have reduced their shots in half. Whereas, the same number of guys are dropping from 12 shots down to 7 shots, which is less than half of their firepower being lost. So you maintain shots longer, but you're paying more points in order to get that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so the sweet spot, I think, from what you're looking at, is 3, 6, or 9 men for rifles. I think at 12, you're just so big, you're going to be really hard to hide anywhere. And the extra number of shots, you're not really getting that many for the amount that you're investing in. I don't think the math is all that good for it. If you have one BAR, I think the sweet spot is like 7 men. Okay. It's maybe 5 to 6 men for non-US because, again, they're not getting the extra shot in there. Because, again, home guard can't be taken regular, right? So they aren't being assessed in this particular grouping, people that we're looking at. Probably safer at like 5 to 6. Belgians can go as small as 5. If you take 5 dudes, give one of them a BAR, you're going to be doing just fine. Poland has to start with at least 6, which is great considering it used to be at like 10. You used to have like the 10th motorized section that could start at 5, which was kind of nice. Now we're started gating at 6. That's fine. If you take 6 dudes, give one of them a BAR, you're getting 7 shots, which is perfectly reasonable, and you're going to get good value out of that. If you're looking at 2 BARs, you really want that sweet spot of 8 men. So, and you'll see it over here. It's a 6 rifles plus 2 BARs. Coming in at 92 points, but it's only 7.66, or 66 repeating points per shot, which is really good, right? I mean, you'd have to go really high to 9 rifles and 2 BARs in order to get better, and not dramatically better than that. And so that's the sweet spot, what you really, really want. And for the 3 BARs, you want to go with like 6 men. You want 3 rifles contributing an extra shot plus 3 additional BARs, giving you a really, really solid investment. You can see it right there near the middle with 3 rifles plus 3 BARs. At 78 points, you're getting 10 shots, which is only 7.8, which is, I mean, by a good bit until you start getting to really, really high numbers. That's going to be your best bet. You can go all the way up to 6 rifles with BARs, which is also really good value. The problem is you're paying over 100 points at that point for a squad, and I'm not sure that's necessarily good for a supporting backline squad. I think that sweet spot is probably just going to be 6 men. So you take your Marines as the base unit, as small as you possibly can effectively, and take them with 3 BARs. And I think you'll be okay if heavy on BARs is what you want to do. Now, when we look at veterans, the math changes actually by quite a bit, and it changes in a lot of ways. And the reason for that, of course, is that instead of 1 BAR being more than half of the cost of an extra man, 1 BAR is now less than half the cost of an extra man. So assuming a 13-point investment on each guy, so this does not include airborne troops, ranger troops, or Marines who purchase stubborn or anything else like that. If this is you just purchasing them at just the base 13 points per body to take a rifle, and then you're purchasing a BARs on top of that, you can see, looking at the math here, that the rifles still perform pretty well at low points levels, right? If there's a small squad. If you're taking 3 rifles only, you're really well optimized. For 3 shots, 9.75 points per shot is really, really good, which means officers, right? Because officers cost 39 points veteran to take 3 dudes with rifles. That is an officer section, okay, is what that means, right? You can take them higher than that with the American book. But the point is that if you're taking an officer section with a couple of the stuff and you're thinking, man, I think I just want to keep rifles on these guys, that is a perfectly exceptional, well-optimized list. The problem is once you start getting to 5 shots, 4 shots, 5 shots, 6 shots, things like that, what you start finding is beyond that 4-shot range, it is way better to start taking BARs on guys. BARs is where the math is, okay? And obviously, you can't purchase like, a 3-man squad and give 2 of them BARs, right, or anything like that. But what it does indicate is that as you start buying guys, you want to buy them at a point that's also bolded, and then know that if you start losing models when you start reaching those lower points, you're still optimized for the amount of firepower that you're doing. So, for example, you might take a 6-man U.S. Army squad and take 2 BARs in it, right? You're taking the bare minimum you possibly can, and then you're taking the maximum number of BARs that you can in your standard typical U.S. Army squad. That's going to be a 90-point investment, which is the best you can get for 9 shots. By a hair, 10 points is better than 10.1 repeating, which is what you'd have for rifles. You could do that to get your 9 shots. And then if you start losing men, you're still optimized pretty well, other than that one little spot where the rifles do better at getting 6 shots. But even then, it's not by much. In fact, actually, as I'm looking at it, it's not actually better. It loses to having multiple. Well, that's what it is. It's losing to the one BAR with the extra rifles, is what it's losing to. And even then, it's not losing by all that much in terms of point cost. It's only 1 point per shot that you're losing, right? So, yeah, it's not that many dudes. 5 or 6 points difference. It's not a dramatic difference, right? So, toward this end, there are ways to build veterans, and if you want to build, if you really like taking 3 BARs on stuff, there's actually quite a few ways you can build this that are quite economical. You're just shooting for those 10, 11, 14, or 15 shots, right, that you're going into with it. You're taking big squads of veterans at that point, right? So toward that end, you start seeing some interesting things happen. First of all, the 1 BAR starts to drop. So if you're looking at Poland or Belgium, and you're looking at taking BARs, I probably wouldn't take them on a veteran section, which kind of makes sense because BARs aren't really good for close combat assault units anyway. So, you'd want your Chasseur Ardennais maybe just with rifles, and you pay the extra point for tough fighters on all of them. And those guys run in close, whereas your regulars are sitting back with BARs and they're doing supporting fire, right? But the critical thing to take away is once you start factoring in veterans, BARs go up in stock by a lot. It is way worth it to take BARs on your veteran sections. The cost is still pretty negligible between them. It's a difference of 10.26 from the best of the BARs to 10.57 PPS, which is interestingly enough tied to the rifles for the average. The rifles have the highest average here. And again, it makes sense because 2 BARs cost less than a dude, right? By a hair, but it does cost less, and you're getting way more firepower than you would have gotten even from 2 dudes, right? So from a conceptual standpoint, the math does make sense. Bars are often going to be the best ones that you're looking at. 2 BARs is the sweet spot, so you don't necessarily need to play U.S. Marine Corps in order to optimize. This is where things get interesting. U.S. Army can be perfectly well optimized. You take the 2 BARs on somebody. We saw that on the last one with regulars. You can do the same thing on veterans. 3 is not strictly necessary. You can still take 3 BARs. It'll still be better, and you can optimize it better than you can rifles. Okay, you just have to buy it at certain levels in order to get that optimization in. But you don't need to play U.S. Marine Corps in order to optimize your firepower, okay? And still, shots are going to be maintained longer by having more BARs. It still makes sense because, again, you'd need lots of bodies in order to maintain those extra shots for longer when you're running the rifle style. So, again, sweet spot, 369 men, same as before with the rifles. That's where your sweet spot is. With 1 BAR, you really want 4 men, so you want to take them as small as possible. And then with 2 BARs, it's still 8 men, and with 3 BARs, it's still 6 men. That's kind of your sweet spots for all of those, for where you want to take them, okay? Now, Rangers, Airborne, stuff like that, where not only do we have a higher cost per man going into it, but also we get access to things like light machine guns, okay? This is a good thing for us to look at. We're also going to take a look at the math for what happens if you take a light machine gun on a regular Airborne section, okay? I threw that math on the very far right-hand side because it's going to ask another question later. Suffice it to say, we're not going to look at it for the bolding process. I put them in underline instead. And the reason why is because obviously if you're only paying 10 points per man instead of 13, 14 points per man in this case, because all of these guys are 14 points per man, obviously it's going to be less expensive to take your light machine gun because it's shooting the exact same way with the exact same level of effectiveness, but you're paying dramatically less for each person. Okay, so we're not going to compare it for the purpose of looking at the averages count above. We're going to look at that for a separate thing in about a minute and a half, okay? But you'll see here that when you start factoring in a 14 point per man difference and you're only looking at 1 BAR or a light machine gun, the rifles start to come back into play. So if you're looking at playing Airborne and U.S. Rangers, and you're thinking to yourself, I think I just want to take 6-man or 7-man squads, you would be tempted to take 6 or 7 rifles. That is a perfectly valid build because for 8 or 9 shots, that is the most optimized way to do it. Not by much in the case of the light machine guns, but it is technically more optimized, right? There's a difference between a 10.5 and a 10.625 and a 10.8 repeating versus a straight 11, right? In terms of actual cost. So if you're looking for 8 to 9 shots coming out of the unit, 6 to 7 rifles is a really, really good bench line, and you could just take just rifles to do that. However, if you're looking at taking 7 bodies, you could just as easily take 6 rifles and a BAR, and you end up with 10 shots instead of 9 shots, or instead of 8 shots in the case of if you were just going with, if you just care about 6 rifles, and, 7 bodies, you're looking at 7 rifles is only 9 shots. BAR is now upping you to 10 for how you get it. And it's actually less expensive than if you were trying to go for 10 shots. It's also less expensive per point than you would be paying for your 9 shots, right? So it's actually even more optimized at that points level for what you're paying. It's actually better than what you'd be getting just by paying for rifles. So if you're looking for 7 bodies, you can go 7 rifles. You can go 6 rifles and a BAR. Both of those work for the purposes of number of shots that you're getting. They are highly optimized. You'll notice the light machine gun is not great for optimization unless you're down to an officer, the light machine gun, and no loader. You're not going to hit very much. They're also obviously the most optimized at 17 shots because they're the only ones that can get to 17 shots, okay? But this is where the question comes in. The LMG on a veteran squad doesn't really need to be optimized. And the reason why is because unless you really want an LMG on a US Ranger squad, which is fine, you can take it. Again, the math isn't horrible, right? You're not off by that much. If you're taking an Airborne squad, there's a legitimate question, which is why would I take the math in columns, the third set of columns for taking the veteran, when I could take the math for the columns in the fourth set of columns and just take them regular and do my support by fire Airborne squads as regular squads, taking a light machine gun. At which point, as you can tell, the math blows everybody out of the water. The math is really good. It still isn't quite as good as the rifle math for regulars. It isn't even as good in all cases as the BAR math for regulars. But if you want that LMG because you just want volume of fire maintained for the longest period of time, because you will maintain 5 shots longer with a light machine gun than you will with BARs or rifles for that matter, right? And you can see that very clearly on the chart. But I think there's a legitimate question of why would you take them veteran when you could simply take them regular if all that you want them to do is tote around a light machine gun. So what we find from this is the average variation is still pretty marginal, right? It's not dramatic. But the LMG is probably not as good. It is better if you're taking them regular, but otherwise it's not as good as the BAR. But maybe it's not as good as the rifles. Honestly, it all depends. Rifles maybe are not the greatest, but they can be the best at specific points ranges, which also tend to be optimized well for veterans. So in my opinion, there's really no real wrong answer. They all meet different roles. I would probably punt on veterans with an LMG, but you could do worse. You could do worse when you're taking it. The real question, I think, is volume, right? How many shots do you actually want? Is 6 shots, because that's probably a pin every turn, is that sufficient? Probably not going to get a wound every turn. That's the problem, right? Because between cover saves, you're probably going to get enough hits that you can trigger a pin, but you're probably not going to get enough wounds after that to then get past a cover save. So you might want to go closer to 10 to 12 shots, at which point then you're probably sneaking in 4 to 6 hits, which is 2 to 3 wounds, which is probably past a 4+ cover save, right? So toward that end, you might consider going with something higher volume, but with higher volume, that is going to start winnowing down in terms of which options you want. Maybe an LMG isn't good enough at this point. Maybe you do need a BAR or 2. Maybe you do need to have, just go straight with rifles, right? Or something like that. A lot of questions. All depends on how many shots you want and thus how many bodies you're looking at. So what's the sweet spot? Sweet spot, if you're looking at taking rifles, again, it's going to be 369 roughly. With a BAR, 7 men. That's what you want. That is like the place to live, which is great because a 7-man Ranger squad, 7-man veteran Airborne squad is a good size. That's a really good size. It'll do the job for you. If you want to take an LMG, you really need 8 men. You'll notice that with that 8 men where you've got 6 rifles, an LMG, and a loader, that's a really good spot at 10.58, so basically 10.6% chance. You are very efficient. You're right about in that same range, but a little bit better than if you were taking 3 rifles with the light machine gun. Taking that 6 rifles with the light machine gun is really good. And of course, you have to have the extra loader on top of that. So that's why it's 8 men. That's a bit big for veteran, but it's on the high end of what I think you can probably still fit easily into cover. I tend to tell people 6 to 8 men, 5 if you want to fit them into a 5-man transport. Like 6 to 8 for veterans is kind of roughly what you want to shoot for. So it's on that high end, but it still does work. If you're taking them regular, if you can take it as like a 5-man section with the LMG, that's really what you want, right? A lot of American sections are going to start at 6. That's the one problem, right? So if you're starting at 6, you can do that. But if you can get it down to 5, that's where you want with the LMG, small as possible. So now we're going to look at inexperienced troops, right? Because inexperienced troops, this is where things get interesting. You can take all rifles, and keep in mind that the extra shots over here on the left-hand side will apply to both American infantry and British Home Guard, which is also what we're looking at here, okay? Realize that obviously Poles and Belgian inexperienced infantry are going to drop a little bit lower in terms of averages because they're not getting extra shots. But keep in mind that the British only get these extra shots if they're doing a fire order, which would also include an advance order that then flips to fire. So they won't get this on an advance like the Americans will, okay? We just always get the extra shots no matter what. That's kind of what makes the American special rule a little bit different from the British special rule, okay? So just keep that in mind. But in this case, as we're looking at these guys, All of us can take one BAR. Inexperienced Americans can take two BARs. British Home Guard can take up to two light machine guns. So we're going to weigh that out. Also keep in mind that the British Home Guard also don't get access to 12-man squads. They get access to 10-man squads, right? So because of that, there's going to be less bodies, which also means, generally speaking, less rifles, which means that you're going to end up with less options. So keep in mind, a 12-rifle Home Guard section isn't possible. Okay, they're going to max out at that 10. Okay, but what you'll find is rifles are present as the optimized choice for about half of the number of shot volumes that you're looking for, right? Obviously, it's going to be that 3, 6, 9, 12 because, again, you're getting shots for free, which is always nice, but also at 7 to 10 men. So 9 and 13 shots respectively, which means they're coming in optimized at about half of the spots, which is really good. And it means that they are, going to be top on basically most of them that are present there. However, also worth noting, adding in a BAR is also optimized for about half of the shot volumes. Okay, so really, when it comes to inexperienced troops, they're actually pretty neck and neck, and it kind of makes sense because a BAR is kind of like buying an extra infantryman, except you're getting that extra shot and you're just getting that extra shot all the time. So it means that even though you're lagging one man behind with the BAR cost, you're still making up for it because you're still getting that extra shot. So like it all kind of works out. It means that you're slightly ahead with one, you're slightly behind with another, and so they're kind of neck and neck with all of them. Two BARs on inexperienced troops does not hold up particularly well at all until you get to 17 shots, which nobody else gets. So toward that end, my personal recommendation would be don't put two BARs on a squad if they're going to be inexperienced. I just don't think it works. If you're going to do it, take it on one, and you'll notice it kind of makes sense, right? It's going to be where you get 3 rifles, 6 rifles, 9 rifles plus the BAR. That's where the math is going to hold up. It's also the ones right before that because you've already kind of bought the extra, little shots. So you're kind of, keeping course, keeping track. But you only paid 6 points for the extra shot instead of 7 points for the extra shot. That kind of makes sense, right? For how that all works out. So toward that end, like how does the math work out? I think you can run one BAR with an inexperienced squad if you really want to. It totally works out. The Home Guard don't perform as well with the light machine guns unless you're talking about a squad that's down to the officer plus a light machine gun that was purchased on an unarmed dude, a light machine gun that was purchased on an unarmed dude, a light machine gun that was purchased on a rifle-carrying dude, and your officer, and then the unarmed loader for one of them. As soon as you add in that second unarmed loader and you're back up to, basically 5 dudes in the squad, not as effective. Just not as effective. Okay, at that point, you might as well just be switching over to running rifles for your Home Guard. So if you want to run larger sections of Home Guard, my recommendation is leave the LMGs at home. It's not actually going to make a big difference for you. But I got to admit, when you're down to just a couple of LMGs, especially LMGs with no loaders, paying only 5 points for a shot is spicy. That is really nice stuff. So I think, interestingly enough, if you're one of those people who purchased a bunch of LMGs to go with your Home Guard, I don't think you've made a bad decision. I think it's fine. Just realize that, you're going to be optimized really with the bare minimum dudes you can have, and the faster you lose some of those rifles, ironically, you might actually be doing better in terms of points per shot. It is nice to have a bunch of those extra dudes. It's nice to have 4 rifles plus 2 light machine guns, and then you basically purchase 3 unarmed dudes, and you have 2 unarmed dudes be the loaders, and then 1 unarmed dude get the second light machine gun, because then at least you can lose a guy, and you're still rocking a good volume of shots, where you're still at that 3 rifles plus 2 LMGs, which is really good. 6 points for a shot for inexperienced troops is really great, right? Keep in mind, obviously, with all of this math, that you're getting -1 to hit. So while you are paying a lot less for each of these, you're also getting less effectiveness. But the nice thing about Home Guard is if you lose one dude, and that dude's just one of your riflemen, but you still got 3 more riflemen plus 2 LMGs, you're getting optimized shots. And if you uprate because you're green, now you're also losing that -1 inexperienced hit penalty. So like there are ways to optimize it. I don't think there are particularly great ways to do it with the LMGs. And it is worth noting that the variation in points per cost is quite dramatic at this point. Right, half of a point per shot doesn't sound like it's dramatic until you realize how many shots you're actually calculating for. You are overpaying for what you're getting. Okay, if you're going to go the LMG route, if you're going the BAR route, it's basically the same. It's a negligible difference between rifles and BARs. It doesn't actually make a difference. Rifles are the best in general. Okay, definitely better than the LMGs for inexperienced troops. Not by a whole lot, but they are technically better than taking the BAR. Okay. LMGs become competitive, as we said, without loaders, which is reduced accuracy. Now they're hitting on 6s to start with. Worse if they have pins. Worse if they move, right? Like it's not good. But hey, if you just are down to them and all you got to do is sit on an objective, you can pump out fire. And hey, maybe you uprated. That would be helpful. But again, that's really where the LMG shine. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Though your shots are maintained, obviously, for the longest with your BARs and your LMGs, right? So what are we looking at in terms of squads? You want 369 men again with rifles. There's no surprise on the math there. You're looking for 7 men with the 1 BAR, which is, again, pretty similar. For 2 BARs, if you want to maximize, you really need 11 men, which is really big for an inexperienced squad. It's going to be very hard to get cover on that. It's going to be very hard to keep it from being out of line of sight in case you just need to keep them and hide them somewhere. And it's a lot of points to put in something. I mean, with 2 BARs, that's 77 points worth of men. That's 12 more points worth of weapons. It's almost 90 points worth of investment in an inexperienced squad that isn't going to do very much for you. So personally, I probably wouldn't do that. And then for LMGs, you want to go as small as possible. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. You want to go as small as possible. So looking at the overall opportunity cost assessment, and then I promise we're going to get into, standard objective holding, objective taking sort of stuff. We're almost done, guys. You guys have done a great job. Thank you for powering through with me because that was a lot of spreadsheets. Okay. For the non-US nations, inexperienced, it's fine. If you were taking them just with rifles, you would be doing fine in terms of PPS, 7, 10, 13, which is great. If you take them with a BAR, it's slightly less than 7. It's close to 9 and then close to 12. It's just over 12 with veterans. That's great. I guess just under 12 with veterans because 12 would be 72. So, all of this is great. You are saving some by taking a BAR. So my recommendation for British, Home Guard, Poland, and Belgium, take the BAR. If you really like LMGs, run LMGs. But if you really want it, I would say if you want to optimize your points per shot, you want to take the BAR. For the Americans, it's tricky, right? Because it depends on how many men do you want, how much volume do you want. From there, it's going to matter. I think the BAR is worth taking in some cases. I think it's worth taking 1 or 2 of them, sometimes even 3 of them. But if you want to go just rifles, you can. But I think the math at least helps to show they are all worth having. Okay. From an objective holding standpoint, we have 30 freedom units worth of range, which is excellent suppression on approach. You will get multiple turns typically to shoot at stuff before they get into you, which is a great way to whittle them down before they can try to take the objective from you. You don't have the fixed property on this, so you get a full 360-degree protection. Right? You can embed the BAR in a 5 or larger man squad, up to 12. In some cases. And so because of that, well, I guess technically with the polls up to 19 if you really wanted to. So the result is you can maintain that volume of fire for a very long time. Oftentimes you can take these regular or veteran, which is really nice. And then this can be the last model that's removed if you don't need the NCO. This is an important play. In our math, we made it so you always started with a rifle and then you added your BAR. After that, technically speaking, if you have a platoon or company commander nearby, and you're down to like 2 men left and you're going to lose one and you're not afraid of that guy running off the board because you're now suffering a permanent -1 penalty for losing the sergeant, you can take sergeant first and lose his rifle and maintain the BAR, and now you've maintained your 2 shots even longer, which would technically improve the math. I didn't do that because I think it's a chancy move, requires you to be really, really specific with your officers and where you place them. You do still have a better chance of failing and just losing the squad entirely, or just failing into do your order and going down, all of which hurts your pins that you generate per turn and your wounds that you generate per game. So, in general, I wouldn't recommend that. Squads are generally more useful when they have sergeants around, but you can, which is really nice. So, hey, it's at least an option. And this is not a one-shot or fuel check weapon. So, unlike things like flamethrowers or, Panzerfaust or, anything like that, like you are better at holding an objective with this because you can technically shoot with it every single game. So use it often, use it regularly, every chance you get, fire the BAR. For objective taking, it does get 2 attacks, which is useful for clearing things out, especially if you want to fire on it 1 turn before you declare an assault, right? Because then you can probably take advantage of point blank range, which is really nice. And then you're getting 2 shots, probably like 2s or 3s to hit, which is really sweet. Maybe 4s if you have pins on you because you were moving up on approach. But even then, there's a chance the BAR, let alone all the other rifles that you have in the squad, are going to be doing something to roll for wounds, right? Which is great. You don't get tough fighters as a special rule, and assault did get harder. So in general, if you're taking BARs, that squad's plan for clearing objectives is probably going to be shooting people off of the objective instead of assaulting people off of the objective, okay? 2 attacks also does not carry over to assault. So if you do go into assault, you're only getting 1 attack for the model. You do not get a second one. So keep that in mind. The cost is 50% more than a submachine gun. It's an extra 2 points over a submachine gun. For the exact same number of shots that you're firing up close. So in general, if you want somebody who's going to be firing up close, you probably want to take SMGs instead of taking BARs. Okay. You also can't really take more than like 1 to 3 in American sections. And in the case of Belgium and Poland, you get really limited access to submachine guns. So toward that end, just keep in mind, like, SMGs are better for objective taking, so I think it's fair to say the BAR is not particularly great for taking objectives. It's fine. It works. It pumps out volume, which is nice, but it's not going to be nearly as helpful for you as SMGs, and unfortunately, the armies that get access to BARs have pretty limited access to submachine guns. So what would I change? First of all, I think that for non-American nations, the BAR is fine. I think it's okay as far as it goes. It's good supporting fire. They don't have special rules. They're going to work with it anyway. So it's not like you're really missing anything. They're just as good, maybe even better, because it's easier to hit stuff now in 3rd edition than they were in 2nd edition. So on the whole, I'd leave those fine. It's okay. For the U.S., there's a question of whether you add it to the U.S. fire and maneuver rule. It doesn't actually make a dramatic difference to volume of fire, and it's not a dramatic points investment to have, it's not like you're paying more or you're paying less. There's not a dramatic difference for the volume that you're getting, right? For the bodies that you're getting, sure. But for the volume that you're getting, it doesn't actually change the math all that much. You're basically in the same boat one way or another. If you're really concerned that 2 points worth of investment is going to make the difference for you in whether or not you win a match, I think I'd probably build the army differently. Is probably what I would do if 2 points is going to make the difference in it. It could, and you might just be playing at the highest level of competition, which I have not played at, to be fair. Okay, but in general, it's not going to make a dramatic difference. So in my mind, I don't think we need to add it in so that rifles and BARs, groups of 3s of those add extra shots. I don't think that's strictly necessary. If we do, I think the BAR becomes an auto include like it was in 2nd edition, just because the value becomes so good on it. And because you're maintaining that volume of shots for longer, right? Because you can remove the BARs last. Snipers can't even take them out of the squad anymore, right? So because of that, I think it might actually make it so that we start seeing more spam of the BARs, similar to what we had in 2nd edition. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if it stays the way it does. There's also been a question, and people have run math on this, and I mentioned in the last video that I would talk about this. There's been some talk about whether or not we should return to the 2nd edition approach to U.S. fire and maneuver, where you're ignoring the -1 to hit penalty instead of gaining extra shots for the rifles that you have. I'm of 2 minds. First of all, ignoring the -1 to hit penalty matters a lot less in 3rd edition when there are less hit penalties, right? It mattered a whole lot in 2nd edition because you were starting on 3s, probably 4s for long range, probably 5s or 6s for cover, which meant a move and shoot penalty could be demoralizing for stuff. It meant you could have an infantry section that was loaded up and got nothing because you were looking for 6s or super 6s. In 3rd edition, super 6s is actually quite difficult to get, especially with squads that are just taking rifles and BARs. Because the only way to get it is you would need to have a 4+ starting to hit, 5+ because you chose to move, 6 is because you have a pin on you, which is maybe up to you or not up to you. 6s by 6s if you're inexperienced, which is a choice you get to make. One of those is a strategic choice, right? It's before the game even begins. It's, because by the way, we're going to do a video on strategy versus tactics. They're not the same thing. And so, we'll talk about that more. But suffice it to say, strategy is stuff you do before the game. It's scenario stuff. It's list building stuff. And to some extent, deployment. Okay, that's strategy, right? In terms of like what you're choosing to deploy with what. So do you deploy something inside of a transport? Are you planning on deploying something in cover or not? All of that is strategy. And choosing to make a unit with or without a BAR inexperienced is your choice. You get to do that before the game even begins. Overwhelmingly, especially since we don't have theater selectors that say all of them have to be purchased inexperienced or something like that, you are not being restricted into and funneled into that decision, right? Second, you also have a choice on whether or not you're going to move a squad. And so because of that, if you can just fire from where you are, which is the most likely thing if you're also going to have pins, right? Choice of whether you choose chaplains to help remove pins and stuff like that to help remove that off of you. All of these things are your decision. So in general, the BAR is going to be able to hit every single time with a lot more security in 3rd edition than it even could in 2nd edition, especially since you're not getting a -1 to hit for every single pin you have. It's a -1 to hit straight, whether you have 1 pin, whether you have 8 pins, doesn't matter, right? So toward that end, I don't think the Americans actually need the ignore -1 to hit benefit in order to be effective with a rolling maneuver. And it's actually better with the way that U.S. Fire and Maneuver works in third edition, because if you choose to stand still, in second edition, you were just passing up on a benefit, right? You know, your special rule didn't help you at all. In third edition, you're still getting extra shots for all the rifles that you have, right? So I don't think we need a return to second edition. I don't think it would necessarily break the game per se. I think it breaks a core rule of game design, which I tend to like, which is, as a general rule, we should be very slow to break core rules. And advance is move and shoot, with the one trade-off of move and shoot that makes it slightly, on par with fire, is the fact that you're getting -1 to hit. So in general, I don't tend to think we should move toward breaking core rules like that. And order dice feels like a core rule thing to me. The trade-offs that are built into the order dice feel that way. But I mean, again, so yeah, I think on the whole, I think it's fine. I think that there's strategic questions with the BAR now. It used to be load them up, take as many of them as you can because it's totally worth it. In third edition, I think there's a real good question on this. Like, how many men do you actually want in the squad? How many shots do you want coming out of the squad? And so toward that end, I think that's an honest question that BARs give you now. Maybe you need one, maybe you need two. Maybe it is nice to have three, right? Maybe you don't need any of them at all. And you can save some points there by not taking them. And then that's combined with a tactical aspect. How many casualties do you plan on taking? Because when you start taking casualties, you're going to probably start with rifles, and you should be starting with rifles. And so if you're going to start with riflemen, that could change your volume a lot, because you're going to lose that extra shot that you were planning on. Now, maybe a BAR is better because you're like, well, I know I'm going to probably suffer 1 to 2 casualties on this veteran squad. So maybe it is worth it to take a couple of extra bodies and take the BAR to make sure we maintain the volume for longer that I actually want, which is 6 shots. I want 6 shots for the longest period of time. So I'm going to take some BARs, right, instead of taking other stuff. Strategy and tactical questions, I contend, are good for game design. Okay, so I think it's okay. I think it's not an auto-include in third edition like it was in second edition. I also think it isn't busted. I don't think it's too good. I don't think it's too bad. I think if you want to take BARs, if you're like me and you love BARs, take them. And so in an ironic turn of events, we're including a slide on recommended changes I'd make, and I'm telling you the change I would make is nothing. So what do you think? Do you like BARs? Are BARs something that you think are worth taking? Are you still of the camp that you're just not convinced? Still not really worth it to take these things? Is still a really, really bad unit? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that I've been pretty fair, pretty honest about it. I'd like to think that I've been pretty good with the math on this. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing the math on this, so I really would like to think that I did a good job on it. Are there things I missed in the math, other than that one thing I forgot to bold at the top of one of the slides? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.